Hi, good morning, people. Welcome to this BAFTA session on our. Welcome to this BAFTA session for documentaries for our nominees this year. I'm going to be doing film by films. We'll have 15 minutes with each of our nominated films in our team today. So first of all, I'd like to welcome up the team behind Three Identical Strangers, director Tim Wardle, and producers Grace Hughes Hallett, Becky Reed, and Dimitri Daganis. So we're going to start from the beginning. It's an incredible story of these brothers. How did you come across it?
I first came across it about 6 years ago. I had made another film about adoption, so I was kind of interested in that area. And I was actually at the theatre, of all the strange places to find an idea, and got talking to a friend of a friend. She is a New Yorker, and she said, gosh, that reminds me of this crazy story about this experiment on identical twins and triplets in New York. Kind of took it from there, yeah.
And then how did you all find them, and then how did you persuade them to take part in the film?
So I got straight onto Google, and the only person connected to the triplets that I could find was Robert's dad. His number was online, so I called that, got through to his stepmom, very politely asked her if she could ask Robert if I could give him a call. Got the message back that he said yes, and called Robert and sort of took it from there. He wasn't particularly keen on the idea to begin with, so as these guys all know, it took a while to get them on side and to trust us.
4 years.
Yeah.
So there had been other filmmakers interested in making a film and a documentary about them. What do you think it was about this team that persuaded them that this was the right choice and the right time to do it?
I think part of it might have been that we were English. Maybe it was just the kind of, they'd had a lot of American people calling. I think their curiosity was piqued by us being Brits.
Don't underestimate Grace's enormous charm as well.
And also maybe just that we rang at the right time. Yeah, I think they were perhaps ready.
I think we also ground them down. I mean, as I say, it's like 4 years. It wasn't, even on the first day of filming, I had my doubts about whether they would actually show up. So it really was a lot of meeting. Both Grace and Becky, met them and their friends and families without cameras. And it just took a long time to build up that relationship.
And that 4 years, obviously, the plot twists and turns and the story unraveled, perhaps even beyond what you first expected. How do you deal with those kind of plot twists and turns while you were making the film?
Well, I mean, I think that's really key. That you go online now and there's like a Wikipedia page for this film and everything. But the truth is, when we started working on it, there were little bits and pieces that were known, and there were little articles here or there, but no one had really kind of laid out the whole thing, and it kind of exists in this pre-internet era, so you couldn't really search online for information. So had to do a lot of kind of old-fashioned journalism, like knocking on doors and things like that. And Becky and Grace together created this kind of timeline, which is I think it's like 32 pages long, because this story encompasses 3 families, 60 years pretty much, or 6 decades. And also there were a lot of people who didn't want to talk about it. So it was a real challenge just to get the basics of it down, let alone film it.
And also I think it's worth remembering that what Grace and Becky also had to manage was the fact that there were other people who'd been in the study, other sets of monozygotic siblings who, as the film was in development, we weren't sure if any of those would feature, what those stories were. Those also had to be chased down, approached, considered, and so there was just an enormous amount of kind of, as Tim says, primary journalism that went on.
There's a great responsibility as well with this story to the triplets, but also to other stories and other potential, people that don't know about what their own circumstances or where their backgrounds come from. How did you deal with kind of the responsibility of telling the story?
Well, I mean, actually, initially, part of when we were trying to find out other twins who were involved in the study, which was really difficult because they all had different names and were given different names when they were adopted to their real names, you know, prior to that. We initially were trying to track them all down just to let them know that we were making this film, whether they wanted to take part of it or not, so that they didn't go to the cinema and see their own story unfolding, you know, with all the twists and turns that are in it. And then we also sort of felt with David and Robert, especially in their families, that we had a responsibility to try and support them through, you know, all the sensitivities of theirs. So we had a really long conversation at the beginning about whether we should provide them with sort of counselling or, you know, some sort of emotional support after sitting down and recounting, you know, all of the traumatic things that have happened in their lives, which was difficult because that trauma occurred because of, you know, people who were trained in psychology and psychotherapy. So that was a difficult...
Yeah, it wasn't like a normal, you know, normally you just make this offer, you know, do you want counselling, do you want psychological support? But when you consider that the damage was inflicted by psychologists, it's kind of like, actually, it's a really sort of nuanced conversation, sort of offer to actually make. And we had huge, you know, discussions internally and with lawyers and people like that about whether we should even make the offer of kind of psychological support. Ultimately, we did, and they declined it, but it was there and is still there today.
And there were ongoing conversations as well about the things that we wanted to explore in the film, that as your relationship and the trust sort of builds up slowly. I remember talking to David about the fact that we wanted to explore his birth. We wanted to talk about their birth parents, which Robert was very reticent to do, and David was a bit reticent, I think, at the beginning, but we felt that it was an important question. You know, who were your birth parents, especially when the mental health issue came up, and we started to explore whether that was something that the scientists were looking into. So, you know, we had sort of very gentle, probing initial conversations, and then I think when you can explain to a contributor why you think something's important, then, you know, you hope that they will understand why you think that's an avenue worth exploring. So,
and there's also trust. You know, you guys earned their trust. But the truth is, this was a story that a lot of people did not want to be told. So there are really significant kind of forces, including from the Jewish Board of Deputies and many of the people in it, who felt like they didn't want this story out there, they didn't want to be in it, they weren't sure to trust these guys. And that 4 or 5 year period was really about chiseling away at not only the reluctance of David and Robert and their families and gaining that trust, but also just breaking down the barriers to tell the story.
Did you ever have, was there kind of any other threats or, you know, repercussions from you telling the story?
Well, there's certainly, you know, when you find a story like this, the first thing you think is, wow, what an incredible story. The second thing is like, well, why has no one told this story before? And we quickly discovered that people had tried to tell it before. I mean, we found out about 3 separate attempts by major US networks, 2 in the 80s, 1 in the 90s. And in each case, those had been shut down. You know, in the 90s, that we spoke to Becky spoke to a triple Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist working for the New York Times, who had basically made a film about the study and about this subject. And the film was all ready to go, and it was pulled by people further up the network, and he never got an answer as to why that happened. So we kept meeting people who said, "You'll never finish this film; it will get shut down. It always gets sort of suppressed."
Yeah, and one of the decisions very early on was when and whether we should contact the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services, who control access to the study at Yale, and whether if we alerted, what that would do. We were so paranoid about, you know, things being shut down, and people had said to us, doors closed in Washington, and this is a political hot potato, and so we were very nervous about that approach and what it would do, and they declined to take part very quickly and passed us onto a sort of crisis management PR company. So we only ever spoke to them, and then David and Robert then made an approach to them separately about their own records, and they were handed over to a medical malpractice lawyer. So it was nerve-wracking the whole time, actually. And one of them, you know, there's such a powerful family who are sort of chief executives or on the board at the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services, who are connected to all the different institutions that we were trying to get into to do research. So that was difficult. I mean, even I think one of them was on the board at Sundance for a long time, so we were sort of saying, oh, we're going to try to get to Sundance. Will that happen? And, you know, they've got a link to the film somehow before we even had a link ourselves, and that was all a bit odd, and I don't know, it was a sort of crippling paranoia, I think, for
There
much
was
of
a
it.
lot of paranoia making the film, that's for sure.
In terms of making the film and from a creative point of view, Tim, and stylistically, it's very specific in certain ways, and you've made some definitive decisions about the interviews you've done with the brothers. What stage did you know that's the way you were going to...
Well, look, one of the reasons that I'd gone to Raw, the production company that Dimitri set up that made this film, was because they'd made The Imposter. I don't know if you guys saw that, but it was a documentary from a few years back, really amazing film. And I just really wanted to learn that kind of style of filmmaking that they kind of perfected. Like, my background is more of a kind of verite obs doc director. And so I sort of, over 5 years that I was there, or, well, actually it's more like 6 now, sort of tried to learn as much as I could. And the key decision we made in this film was to restrict the point of view to the brothers' sort of perspective. So you very much got a forced perspective. So everything the audience learns in the film is learned at the same time, pretty much chronologically, as the brothers learnt it. So you're really, the idea is to really kind of put you in their shoes, but also kind of restrict. Quite often documentaries takes more of a bird's eye view, and this is like very much from their POV, so that everything you learn is as they learnt it. And the idea is to make you kind of go through the range of emotions that they did. And this is something that Raw have done on other projects. And I think it's really interesting. In scripted, perspective is everything. Whose POV is telling a story is key. Sometimes in documentary that isn't the case, and sometimes I think documentarians don't think as much about that.
Thank you, team. Thank you. Okay, we are now going to welcome the team of McQueen. Can we have directors Ian Bonnott and Peter Tegui and producer Andy Ryder? Welcome, hi. Anyone? Can we talk about the genesis of the film and the decision to make it, and at this particular time specifically?
So actually none of that. There's not like a decision to make it. It came out from a conversation with a distributor. So we were just brainstorming loads of great British artists or sports people or celebrities in a sort of artistic manner. And McQueen came up, and the people having that conversation called me up to get involved because they didn't want a documentary maker. I think probably from the same angle is they wanted the film. The film from the start was to be a cinematic proposition, a cinema proposition. So from that point, they called me up, and DNI, which I've got a company called Misfits, we love the idea of doing it. I've been a McQueen fan from day one. I've shot hundreds of commercials and videos over the years, and I don't think there's a single treatment I've done, probably thousands of treatments where there's not a picture of McQueen. Plus, when I first moved to the UK, I used to work a club next to him. But basically, I had 4 years. We didn't have any access, we didn't have any archive, we didn't have anything, and we made the entire film and fully financed it in 16 months.
So how do you go from zero access to zero archive to persuading the family that, this is the time for the film to be made, and persuading the contributors that, we want to make this film and we're the filmmakers to do it?
I think a lot of patience, which was difficult because there were various other McQueen projects out there, both dramatised and possibly documentary. And so our distributors were all naturally putting pressure on us to be first out of the gate, and they give us a very tough sort of delivery schedule. And we were, constantly sort of like fighting with that on one hand, and on the other hand, sort of like knowing that if we were to bring, for example, the family, Janet and Gary, on board, that wasn't going to happen overnight. In fact, our first contact with them, they just said a straight no. And so it really took a lot of time. And what happened is that we started off by interviewing people who knew him when he was at the beginning of his career, and who were happy to talk, and they weren't connected with the fashion business. I mean, it's really interesting to listen to you guys talking about the difficulties of access around institutionally. I mean, it's exactly the same with McQueen. The brand didn't want to know, the family didn't want to know. The fashion industry is very, you know, it's very small. It's got a kind of like, they're very protective. They obviously have image to protect, business to protect. So it took a long time for us to kind of gradually make people feel confident. And the word, from those early interviews that we did, I think it's true to say that the word got around that we were actually trying to make a film that was balanced, that was, our hearts were in the right place. We weren't trying to do something sensationalistic. There was a big worry about that, I think, because McQueen's life is, there was a sex, drugs, rock and roll aspect to it. It's very easy to turn that into, I mean, as they did while he was alive and after he died, streams of tabloid articles and so on. So I think people gradually became more confident with us. And in terms of archive, it was like being a private investigation team. I mean, we just had to track down, you know, we started off on YouTube as everyone does, but you know, to track down the pieces of archive that had never been seen before, that took a lot of time.
And talking about the access again as well, one of the, I think, challenges of this film, if we'd have waited to get access at the beginning, it probably would have never got going, because I don't think anyone would have come on board. So there was a sort of sheer determination to make the film. I mean, it's definitely probably like one of the big don'ts of documentary is, you know, make sure you get your access first before you set off for at least some access. And we really did have none, which put a huge amount of stress on the team as we went along, because, you know, there was various people that came in. I mean, we only got the family quite late in the day as well, was it?
The funny anecdote is that at the beginning we were so scared we had no film, and you know, you had the entire, we financed the entire film pre-sales. So you have people who they bought something, so you have to give them something. So every single interview at the beginning, I think the first 6 or 8 interview, we would ask every single question we could ask. And even if people had no clue, we'd say, what do you think? Which is, we hated that, but literally we were really scared. Another anecdote is, with our lovely distributor here, we tried to reach out the brand. You know, could we have some clothes or something like this? No answer. Tumbleweed. Literally 80% of people on the red carpet tomorrow night are going to be dressed by those two Frenchies, Pinault and Arnault, who owns the entire fashion industry. You know, the starlet will be talking about how great they look, how amazing it is. And, you know, for us, it was really like, you know, we were really hated. You know, and this, you know, I've got a huge amount of friends that work at McQueen, and they've all told me, Ian, till you finish the film, we can't talk to you.
We also had people who actively did not want us to make the film, who were sort of connected with the brand, and I found out that some of the people who had actually agreed to talk to us, we get a phone call saying, I've just been told I can't talk to you, and I'm just wondering if you really are for real and you're really going to make a good documentary as you say you are, because I've been told not to speak to you. And, you know, so we had to battle against those sorts of things as well. But, you know, hey, it made it, we kind of like did it by the seat of our pants one way or another.
We had the lack of knowledge of that, but one good aspect of that is that there's like 3 powers that fight each other within Lee's life, Alexander McQueen's life, and one of those powers, because we were not getting the 2 others, probably talk to us, and that's the family. And I think that, you know, we had a lot of perseverance, and we tried to approach them in a very respectful way, but I do feel that deep down, they feel as well that was a chance for them to put their word in, which they didn't get. They got sidelined by the brand. They did get a bit of money from the inheritance, for sure, but the way they got treated is not very classy. And that, I think, enraged all of us.
It's kind of reflective in a way that he was always the outsider, and even when you're making the film, kind of still remains the outsider. His death is still relatively recent, and for those close contributors that you've got, obviously very painful still. What was it like, you know, working with them to kind of relive that experience and, you know, that experience of being a friend?
I have to say we had a bit of naivety. Because of all this excitement, you get the budget together and you go off to do, you start calling people and you start talking to people. And I remember one of our first interview Rebecca Barton, and even just talking to her before we started rolling, she burst into tears. And I think that's the moment when Peter and I were like, oh my God, wow, you know, it's naively, probably, hold my hand, you know, we felt, oh, he's such a genius, everyone's going to be wanting to talk to us, everyone's going to be celebrating, but there was all those little darkness of fights and anger and
Also, you know,
undealt issues.
Because it was 8 years after his death, so we thought people would have processed it, but that couldn't have been further from the truth. You know, I think that's something, yeah, absolutely. We were a bit naive, but we hadn't fully appreciated the impact that someone committing suicide can have on the close circle of friends and family. And, you know, for all of them, for everyone who was involved with Lee, it was it's like talking to people who fought in the resistance in the Second World War, in the sense that they were in the trenches and they were, you know, but it was the most, and it was a dark time, but it was also the most exciting and impassioned time of their lives. And it was like that working for Lee. I mean, it was tough and it was dangerous, and it was sort of dangerous not in the sense of losing your life, but dangerous in the sense that you were working. Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. The mental health issues, the pressures, also just the pace of life, the fact that you were doing stuff that no one had ever done before, which was the case with McQueen. Every show was sort of like pushing the boundaries of what could be done in the, you know, fashion shows. If you look at any fashion show now on YouTube, you know, on Instagram, you'll just see a parade of models marching up and down. And with McQueen, it was like it was performance art, really, and cinema.
What you've done so beautifully is show us kind of the multifaceted man, so many aspects of his personality that I think so many people didn't have the chance to see. What would you, well, as filmmakers, want a viewer, if they could take away one thing about him, what would it be?
I mean, for me, one of the key messages of the film is about mental health, because obviously he lost his battle with mental health eventually. And I think, you know, someone who had all that success and achieved so much and was so brilliant, you know, one of the key takeaways we really hope people look at is to look after yourself. And, you know, when, you know, it's good to take a break, because he was so successful, but he never really stepped away. He was trying to. We know he was trying to, because he'd applied for, was it?
Slade.
Yeah, for a master's degree, and he was going to take a year or two out, but he ended up not feeling like he could quite get out. He had his name on the door. He wanted to stay there, and unfortunately, that was, you know, that he just didn't have that time to give himself some breakaway and like work on himself.
Thank you, Andy, Ian, and Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd now like to welcome the filmmakers behind RBG, Judy Cohen and Betsy West. So, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, how do you even get access, you know?
Yeah, that's the story of today's talk, is access, right? And I think, you know, similar to what happened with McQueen and also Three Identical Strangers, we didn't have the full promise of access when we began filming. We did have a slightly open door from Justice Ginsburg, who we had written to in 2015, and her initial reaction at that time, when we suggested doing a documentary about her extraordinary life, her initial reaction was not yet. She was 82 at the time, so we're like, okay. But then, you know, we thought, well, she didn't say no. She said not yet. So then we went back a few months later and wrote her again and said, you know, we don't really have to talk to you right away, but we'd like to start interviewing people, because we realized that in our case, anybody we contacted to talk about her, you know, former clients or colleagues and friends, they were all going to call her and say, is it okay to do an interview? So we basically put together a list of people that we wanted to talk to and suggested, well, we don't have to talk to you, but we'd like to talk to these people. And this time she came back and said, well, I can't talk to you for at least a couple of years. However, if you are going to be approaching people, you might want to consider, and then she named 3 more people. So that was the moment where we thought, okay, she's opened the door, and then we just kind of took it from there.
Yeah, and then the next stage I feel like gets even more similar
Yeah.
to the McQueen story and how you described it unfolding. I mean, we started doing interviews with people that were relevant earlier in Justice Ginsburg's life, people whose stories and cases she had represented before the U.S. Supreme Court when she was a lawyer fighting for equal rights for women, and also some of her former colleagues. And in the same way that you know, McQueen's life had been sort of sensationalized, Justice Ginsburg, there's not sort of the same tabloid elements to her story, but in fact, the kind of modern interpretation of her story has been, to a certain extent, trivialized as being all about, you know, internet memes and her as the notorious RBG, which, like, is great, but is also like, you know, you wouldn't want to make a documentary that was like, oh, look at this, like a Supreme Court justice and people have tattoos of her, like, isn't that cool and funky? Like we wanted it to be clear to her that we were going to do a more serious, deep story that really looked at the serious constitutional issues to which she's devoted her entire life. And it was made much easier for us, having done a bunch of interviews where presumably people were sort of, you know, the word gets out. Yeah. These things are done privately, but like not secretly. And I think the word started to spread, like, okay, these women have done their homework and are asking serious questions and really want to make a film about how you use the U.S. Constitution to promote equality. And so that word filtering back to her helped get us kind of bit by bit more access, and part of the key was just not pushing for everything at once. We didn't jump into the thing saying like, okay, like we're here, we've got a camera crew ready to come into your home and into the gym. Like, it would have been like, are you insane? But actually, over 3 years of work on it, eventually we did get into her home and on the gym, and not by breaking in. So
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I did think, I'm like, oh, yeah, the gym. I'm like,
How did that happen?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as Julie said, we'd been filming for, you know, about 9 or 10 months, and most of our communication with Justice Ginsburg had been through either emails or seeing her at some of the events that she speaks at law schools and, you know, opera festivals and things. So, you know, we had had interaction with her, but kind of in these quasi-public settings. So we asked to have a private meeting and sort of figured, okay, now's the time. We have to do the ask. And the ask involved, we had like 4 things we wanted, and we had the list. And the 4 were, you know, to film in her office, to film some interaction with her family, to film her working late, you know, at home, because she works, you know, late at night at home, to get a scene there. And then the last thing that we asked for, which I asked for, and, you know, I could barely get the words out of my mouth. I was so nervous. I just said, and do you think it would be possible for us to film you working out in your gym? You know, and then
it's just a long silence.
a long silence. I mean, that's sort of the way Justice Ginsburg is. She's not someone who just jumps right in. So pause. And she
I
said,
never thought I would see her
Yeah.
doing a plank.
she said, I think that would be possible.
Yeah.
And so that was the moment when, you know, and then a few months later we were filming in her gym.
Did she have any directive towards you about what aspects of her life she wanted to show and what message she wanted to put across?
Happily, she did not. She didn't. She did suggest events that she was going to be at that she thought would be good for us to film, and in some ways that sort of focused us. They were great. I mean, they included her returning to the Virginia Military Institute 20 years after she had written a ruling that opened up that institution to women. Which was just, you know, at that time we didn't know that event was going to be taking place. She told us about it about 8 months in advance, her office did. So we're like, wow, that sounds amazing. Yes. So, and also that she was going to have a small speaking role with the Washington National Opera. Again, fairly shocking information when we got it. And like, oh, you could come to the performance. And in the end, she actually even let us go backstage to, she her schedule is such that she actually did her entire rehearsal for that role of a real operatic performance in Washington, D.C. The whole rehearsal, her part was in the second act, and her rehearsal was done during the intermission. In fact, they extended the intermission so that she could rehearse in costume, which she looked pretty amazing, and it was great. So, you know, so in those senses, you know, she suggested when we said we wanted to talk, you know, we wanted some interaction of her with a family member, she actually did suggest her granddaughter Clara, who at the time was about to graduate from Harvard Law School, as the character. But beyond that, she had no...
No editorial restrictions, nothing really. And in fact, most amazingly, she did not ask to see the film before it premiered at Sundance. And when we called her office to tell them that it was going to be playing at Sundance, we said, would the Justice like to come? And sure enough, she came and watched the film, you know, in an audience of over 500 people for the first time.
Were you just staring at her the whole way through?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
What's really beautiful as well, when talking about the family, the relationship she had with her husband, and, you know, the sweetness that, you know, unfolds there, and how important it was to have this man that kind of, you know, for so many, you know, well, it's just a story you don't hear, to be fair, you know, the man that actually takes care of the home and takes the back seat so his wife can flourish. At what point did that come out?
Yeah, it kind of came out throughout. I mean, we knew going in that would be part of the story. We knew she had had a happy marriage with a supportive husband. But that was actually the biggest change in the process of the film from what we had initially pitched, was that the sort of the percentage of the movie that took up, because we thought that, first of all, that story is incredibly engaging. Secondly, it really brought out, you know, part of doing a film like this is you're trying to let people get to know your character as a person. That's really hard with Justice Ginsburg. She's a very reserved, can be quite serious person. However, whenever the subject of Marty comes up, it's like her complexion changes. She responded emotionally so much that it felt like you could get to know her through her feelings of love towards her late husband.
Yeah, you know, you would think, well, maybe she'd be sad to talk about Marty, that he's gone. But in fact, every time his name comes up, she just, you know, just bursts into a smile. She wants to talk about him, wants to hear about him. So yeah, that part of the story did grow. And the response to that, I think, from many people, especially men, has been very strong. People come up and say, wow, we're really happy to see a good guy in a film, you know, that he's a kind of feminist hero.
And to an extent, you know, yes, that it's maybe unusual to have a documentary that's really like a date movie rom-com, which we think ours is, but like, we kind of feel like that's part of the political point of the film too. Like, there's this whole way of kind of dismissing, one of the big raps on feminism is that, like, oh, like fighting for feminism and equality, it's like that's not attractive, it's not romantic, it's not sexy. And, you know, to have a feminist love story that's also a super romantic love story, actually, that's where like the whole feminist, like, personal is political and political is personal thing for us feels like it comes in.
I think the success of the film and why it's resonated, I think, with so many audiences around the world, is that it's obviously about this prolific woman, but made by two women with a predominantly female team, I gather, kind of, so that reflection is kind of perpetuated all the way through. How important was it for you to kind of keep your core team kind of female-led?
Yeah, it was very important. We figured we are making a film about a woman who's played a tremendous role in obtaining more equal treatment for women in our country. And there's been just so much talk about the lack of opportunity for women that we just set out and said, well, we should first see if we could find a cinematographer and who's a woman. And, you know, it wasn't hard. It really wasn't hard. I mean, we worked with Claudia Raschke. She was incredible. There were other women as well. I mean, it just turns out if you're intentional about this that it can work. So it just sort of went from there. Our editor, Carl Gutierrez and our composer, Miriam Cutler, all the key roles. And I think not coincidentally, when we went out to look for producing partners for this film, once Justice Ginsburg had given us the kind of, the open door, and we knew that we were going to start filming, we talked to a number of companies to support it, and the ones who jumped up initially, not initially, after we'd had a few pitches, CNN Films came through, and not coincidentally, run by women, Amy Antelis and Courtney Sexton. So I think they understood the importance of the story as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Julie and Betsy. And we have finally one of the directors of Free Solo, Chai Vasaravi. Welcome. Hello. Free Solo. It's a terrifying watch. How terrifying was it to make it?
It was incredibly terrifying to make this film. But we felt like we believed in Alex and we believed in his story and felt that it was an important film to make. But yeah, in terms of counseling, I feel like our whole crew still needs counseling because that's just what it was. I think we all experienced a certain PTSD afterwards.
I can imagine. So the film was directed with your husband, so co-directors. How does that directing partnership work, specifically with this film as well?
So yes, Jimmy Chin is my directing partner. We're also married. Jimmy has had 20 years as a professional climber and as a National Geographic photographer and vertical world filmmaker. So there's really no one better to be able to direct what happened on the mountain on different levels. One, he can, his images, they're spectacular. It was he could strive to do justice to Alex, like to the scope of what Alex was trying to do. And also he brought a very intimate knowledge of kind of the climbing mentality and this idea of, he's made a career on risk assessment. So that was an incredibly important part of this film, was to be able to manage that risk, to be able to negotiate around Alex in terms of what he was doing and how, just kind of the push and pull of filming. And for me, I guess this is my 6th feature-length documentary. I come from a filmmaking background. I don't, I'll climb in the gym. So, the partnership kind of works. So we were interested in bigger ideas, and Alex's story seemed to have that potential, like this idea of a kid who began climbing because it was without a rope, because it was less scary to go out by himself and not have a partner, so no rope, than to speak to another person. And that same kid, wasn't hugged, but he saw that other people hugged, so tried to teach himself how to hug. Same thing that vegetables seem to be good for people, so let me teach myself to eat a vegetable one by one in my 20s. And that idea that if you work really, really hard at something and you have this vision of trying to connect, anything's possible. So that was the story we were interested in telling. And so that's probably, and also I was interested in the emotional development. Where did he come from? How do you structure this story? So that's how our partnership kind of works. I'm bringing an outsider perspective, a strong filmmaking perspective, and Jimmy brings this insider feeling, and also, he's a wonderful cinematographer.
In terms of that structure and where you come from, there's obviously the duality, there's the intimacy of that closed kind of van and that closed space, and then you've got a never-ending vista, and kind of the duality of it is really interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit?
The van was very, very important because we knew it's exactly that. It's this very intimate, kind of almost like womb-like situation that he lives in, and it was a very intimate situation. We would sometimes we'd sleep on the floor of the van, literally. I could have given a few more details, but I'm not going to.
It's a safe space.
Yes, yes. But it became what we couldn't have anticipated while making the film was that he was going to fall in love. So when we began making the film, Alex was dating online, which I don't know why it's just so funny to me, but it's always funny for me to think about Alex online dating and trying to explain to people what he does, and going on these dates in his climbing clothes, and we just like, don't you want to buy a pair of jeans, Alex? And he's like, no, these are good pants. He's very efficient, very practical. And then inviting women back to the van, like that was the question, like what happens then? And then he met Sani, and she is a very special person. She is emotionally intelligent, and she is self-confident enough to be able to push back on him in a way, to say that this makes me very uncomfortable, but I'm gonna try to love you anyway. And that was a revelation for Alex. So the van space suddenly became like even more intimate because we were already living in it. So she moves in too, and there are like 5 people in this little van. But you see them fall in love, and that space ends up being very important in the film because it is the tension, or the kind of almost the opposite, the tension with what he's doing outside of the van trying to climb this mountain.
Do you think he perhaps looked at your relationship and there was a reflection back, this is something that I want and, can have for myself, kind of the filmmaker influencing the subject in a way?
I never thought of it that way when we were in the field, but it's something that our editorial team really believes in. And it was interesting to kind of look at it through that lens. I do think that our kids were in Yosemite. It was a whole family affair, and it's also kind of hectic. We've got 2 small children. Jimmy and I are, being parents as well as directing partners. There are a lot of people running around, but I do think it probably influenced both of them in that it was something that was possible, And I think it also affected the film in a quite important way, where I was incredibly empathetic towards Sani. And felt that both Jimmy and I felt it was very important to give her enough space to be able to express herself in a more nuanced way than, woe is me, I'm scared about him climbing. And that was a direct reflection of our own relationship and things that we have negotiated.
In that way, I don't know if you're aware of the complicity within the film and kind of inserting yourself and deciding how you did it, and that must have been a huge decision in that sense, and what role are we going to play and how are we going to insert and expect kind of this huge existential, maybe kind of piece. How did you kind of have those conversations?
So for those of you who haven't seen the film, basically we include the filmmaking in the film, and it gets to this existential, ethical question at the heart of the movie, which is, by filming him, could we cause him to fall? In some way, could we distract him from what he's doing? And can you live with that risk?
Did you hold your breath for 2 years?
For 2 years. I honestly, it cannot be overstated just how heavy it was. And so we weighed those ethical questions very carefully before we ever embarked on making the film, because we actually were interested in making a film, and then Alex was like, if you're gonna make a film, there's only one film to make, and that's Free Soloing All Cap, which as a filmmaker, I was like, that sounds amazing, and Jimmy was like, no way. Okay. So that's a good insight into the partnership there. But, so no, we weighed it, and it came down to the fact that we truly believed in Alex and this idea of living your life the way you want to live it, a life of intention. Alex has thought more about his own mortality than anyone else I know, and he chooses to do that, and that is quite inspiring. And there's nothing that's a maverick about him. The film is mostly about how much he practices and how meticulous he is. But you have to live in that. You've got to visualize the worst case scenarios. And I think the best answer to that question is I think there are 3 scenarios, right? There's one that he doesn't do it, and it's too hard, which we knew that he would work really, really hard until he figured that out. 2, he succeeds, and then the 3rd is the worst. But I don't think the film we wouldn't have tried to make a different film. The film is always about honoring this dream and this kind of perseverance and courage. But the only way to kind of handle the ethical question was to make some very strict guidelines. The needs of the film could never trump the needs of Alex. Production couldn't take over the situation. And the best way to articulate that is that we had a rule: we could never ask Alex if he was going to free solo All Cap. So 2 years of filming. we could never be like, is today the day? Like, how are you feeling? Are you getting close? We just never, ever talked about that. So it meant that we had to be always ready. And that was very difficult, production-wise. And we also had to like insulate him from our own feelings, and we had to ask our crew to insulate him from their own feelings. And that was hard because a lot of them are his really good friends, because you needed like these elite pro climbers who could also film. That was the only way to keep up. And so it became about commitment. Like Alex was committed to us, we were committed to him, our crew was committed to the endeavor and to Alex, but it was like this weight for 2 years on our shoulders. And so clearly it was a real relief when he did it. But including the filmmaking and those questions seemed to be the only like authentic and ethical way to kind of put it out there and say we are thinking about this deeply.
It has resonated in terms of kind of the story of one man setting out to do something that he wants to do. For some reason, it's captured everyone in kind of this time of, world crisis. What do you think it is about kind of Alex and his story and what he's trying to achieve that's kind of gripped everyone?
I think it's one documentary is enjoying this like amazing moment, and I think that all the films that were up here, like RBG was like it kind of paved the way. I really believe Free Solo would not have been what it's become if RBG and Three Identical Strangers and Won't You Be My Neighbor hadn't preceded it. I think that we've had a lot of conversation about this, and I think that audiences are hungry for truth, and they're also hungry for a communal experience where you can actually feel something with a group of people in a theater. And I think that was a lot about Free Solo was a lot about that. But also it's just like in these broken times, you never know how a film is going to land with audiences. And we have been overwhelmed by this kind of response saying that Alex's courage inspires courage. That people walk away inspired by this idea that, again, if you work really, really, really hard, you can achieve your dreams. And I think that that's what the moment is about with this film. It's just that people go in there, you're gripped, you're sweating, you're holding someone's hand that you don't know, you're moaning, doing whatever you need to do. But you're experiencing it with other people, and then you come away kind of inspired that, you can change things in some way. So it's not an overtly political film, but I do believe it has this heart. We always hoped it would have this heart of inspiring people to do more or think about why we're living.
Yeah, it was terrifying and exhilarating all at the same time. Thank you so much, Chai.
Thank you.